Hey there, guys. So, let me tell you something. Relationships, they can be pretty hard. And even harder than that is stop laughing. It gets me every time. I try to ignore you. I can't ignore you. Anyways, relationships, they be hard. And even harder than that is navigating the balance between intimacy and commitment. And if that's something that you particularly are curious about and want to know how to bridge all that, we're going to talk about that in today's stream. So let's get started. Welcome to thoughtraid, a show where we take on thoughts and find better ways of thinking about them. I'm Brandon, and this is Tim, and today we're going to be talking about intimacy and commitment, but most importantly, we have a special guest with us, Chelsea.
Yay! Hello, Chelsea.
Hello.
And she's going to be helping us with this topic today. So, per usual, Tim, you've got the best questions, and we want to jump right into this because, again, relationships are hard, and really kind of just, again, figuring out like how much you're supposed to share with someone, depending on also how committed you're supposed to be with them. All that kind of stuff could be difficult to navigate. So let's jump into that.
Well, you're saying relationships are hard. I don't think they actually are.
Really?
I think boundaries with ourselves and maintaining those boundaries is hard, but actually going through the relationship, it's supposed to be an enjoyable process of just discovering that other person. I think we really complicate it.
It's a very valid point.
Go get it. Oh, I said you go girl. Thanks, Zach.
Hey,
But
Zach.
recently, Chelsea and I recorded a video about the relationship between intimacy and commitment. And it's on YouTube under Break the Meta. So go to YouTube, type in Break the Meta, intimacy, commitment, give it a glance. But we covered a lot of cool stuff, specifically how those two things line up and how I think you said that intimacy should never outweigh the commitment.
Yeah.
That's where we get in trouble.
Yes.
So we're going to kind of expand on that a little bit today, but I don't know, just back when I first heard from Chelsea that there is a correlation between intimacy and commitment, it's like so many things clicked for me, It's like, oh, this totally makes sense. That's why this relationship just broke apart and just crumbled, and that's why this one didn't seem that awesome, so because I was so committed but I was getting no intimacy, or I was getting more intimacy than the commitment. We were just confused because our feelings were all over the place and our commitment to each other was not. But today we're talking specifically about boundaries and how boundaries play into relationships, and I think this is a really interesting trio to talk about.
Oh, yeah.
Because we've had our own run-ins together and individually with boundaries in the past couple of years.
Yeah.
So I guess the first place I want to explore with this is, what does it look like to navigate boundaries in a relationship? And Chelsea, I want to throw this to you since you're our resident expert on relationships.
Because I'm a girl.
Well, in our group, it's like, not even in our group, but within our friends circle, you're one of those people that people often go to for wisdom and guidance.
Yeah. Thanks for calling me old, Tim. No, I'm just kidding. I overthink relationships a lot, so I have lots of thoughts with regards to relationships and how and why they work and or don't work. So I do have a lot of people that come to me, and from my wealth of failure, I give them advice. But I would say probably
Grab my glasses, sorry.
after 2 relationships ago for me, which was about 4 or 5 years ago, I did a book study. So I'll start with that, about boundaries, which is a book called Boundaries by authors Cloud and Townsend.
Right there.
I love him so much.
Right here in our background. So if you have not read this book, I so very highly recommend it.
Worth
because
your time.
Odds are your boundary understanding is probably incorrect, and therefore it's causing problems in your life. So I'm going to start with explaining what boundaries are and what they aren't, and then maybe that will help inform the rest of our conversation. So boundaries, I thought growing up, were dumb and pointless and just a bunch of rules. And so when I developed a very very compartmentalized life, I had hard walls between things and thought that meant I had boundaries. So it was just like lines you just don't cross, and that's the boundary, like the hard line, which made it very weird and very like legalistic feeling, and not at all relational or in any area of growth. And so it was a very performative understanding. When I read this book, they described boundaries as thinking of it in terms of your property line. Like if you have a house, your boundary is the edge of your property line. That is the edge of what you are in charge of. That isn't a hard wall. Like, I don't know, you don't have like a moat around your house that's keeping a bunch of people out. You just have the edge of what you're in charge of. And so keeping that in check, right? I'm in charge of my yard. I mow my yard. I don't mow the whole neighborhood. That would make me exhausted.
Right.
Yeah, well, kind of taking that for a second, we used to have some neighbors, and old neighbors, if you're watching, I love you. I'm just using you as an example from my own heart, but we had some old neighbors, and their trash would always just come over into our yard. And I had this internal conflict where I wanted to say something, but at the same time, I didn't want to be that guy because conflict is scary, you know, but at the same time, it's like every time I went to go mow our yard, it's like I was mowing over toys and wrappers and diapers. Well, not diapers, but, you know,
Gosh.
garbage, you know?
Not fun stuff.
And it's like, okay, I could just put up a fence. And if we had an HOA, that might be even better because we don't have an HOA here. So there's no enforcement of, you know, what you can and can't do.
Yeah. Except by the city, but yeah.
True. But like, and people walk up and down our street all the time and they let their dogs poop in our yard. And it's like, man, I'm responsible for this. Why does it irritate me so much that this keeps happening?
Because someone's overstepping your boundaries.
Yeah, well, I never mentioned it to him.
Yeah.
You know, it just kept creeping up and just getting me more pissed and more pissed
Building
and more
resentment.
pissed. Yeah. And it's like, I never even communicated to him that it frustrated me. And I think this is a parallel to a lot of relationship issues where people just get to a point where they break.
You're in a great metaphor right now. Keep going.
Yeah. Well, I'll throw it back over to you. But I was just thinking, like, you were talking about the idea of boundaries being like your property line. And it's like, anybody can just walk on my property, man. We painted our back porch recently, and I went out there the other day and I saw little paw prints on it. I'm like, what animal was on my back porch? You know, they must have done it when I wasn't watching because I'd love to see this. Like, especially if it's like a little like a raccoon or something. I love animals, but just thinking like you put up gates and fences and stuff to keep stuff out, but then like my garage, I have to hit a button to open the door to let myself out or let myself in. And when they came over today, Brandon and Chelsea, Brandon hit the doorbell and I had to elect to let him in.
Yep.
And it's that election process.
Which is how boundaries work, right? Like they shouldn't be impenetrable walls. That's not a true boundary. A boundary is a fence that you can not only let things in, but also take things out. So you want to let good things in and also like get rid of the junk at the same time. And if you have a hard wall, you can't do either one of those things. So like that concept of boundary really, really shifted how I think about like all levels of relationship, right? Because if I'm only in charge of me, I have a tendency to be like a people pleaser or a perfectionist or what are they called? Overly responsible. Overly responsible. Which means instead of just taking care of my own yard, I also would be the person who's in the neighborhood watch who's like, I'm sorry, your grass is like half an inch too high. Can I help you with that? Not in real life, but like emotionally, like right. Like you said, a lot of people come to me and to help process through things, and I have to be able to go, okay, I'm allowing you to come into my space. You're gonna process what's in your boundary to process, and then at the end of that, I have to then like re-extend my boundary out to my edge so that I'm not taking on your yard in the process. In relationships with the over responsibility, a lot of times I would diminish my space to allow someone closer and then I would start taking care of their space.
Mm-hmm.
That is literally the definition of codependency at that point, because I was working on their problems more than they were. But yeah, so learning that boundary, learning to hold space for yourself so that you know what you're responsible for, and also allowing your boundary to touch someone else and them to take care of their space. That's like the healthy way to do it, rather than collapsing in on each other.
Yeah. Using this analogy of like putting a fence up and a gate or a door and allowing things to come in and come out. When you were talking to people, I just thought about this because I know I've overstepped this boundary so many times in my life, and people have too with me as well. Like when you allow people into that vulnerable space, how do you, I guess, infer to them or help them acknowledge that they've come through a gate that you've elected to open, and that now they need to step back on the other side of it?
Like when someone comes to me to process and I let them in my space and help them process and then
because
extend.
I know that when I've done that in the past with people, there's a sense of kinship, a sense of like, oh, I can trust this person, especially if I don't have other people. Then it's like,
oh, like a clinger.
Yeah, because it's like, because
Yeah.
a lot of people that have boundary or issues with boundaries don't really have satisfying relationships, and so when they find a relationship where they're allowed in, it's very difficult to help them acknowledge that, hey, this is a gate.
They're unleashing 100% of themselves into one person.
Yes.
So
So how do you establish to them that there is a gate and that there are times they're not allowed in?
Well, to go back to your yard analogy, communicating, literally. The stuff coming into your yard and into your yard, like that is a great example of what it looks like to walk next to someone who's walking through stuff. That you can be there and be like, you're in a mess and I'll be next to you, but I'm also gonna like let you know when your stuff is affecting me negatively. And that's expressing needs. So saying like, hey, I need space, or I need alone time, or I need time to process on my own, or that can look like sometimes drawing a hard line. If someone is, if you have communicated a boundary that you have, and the person has acknowledged that they're understanding the boundary that you're drawing, because sometimes it's just like not clearly communicated, and so like someone keeps stumbling over it. So if you said like, hey, I can only commit this much, and they keep trying to push, it may come to a point where you have to draw a hard line for a little bit and be like, you're not listening, you're not honoring my space that I've asked you to, so for now I am gonna have to draw a hard line in the sand. And that doesn't have to be forever. That can be just, temporarily to like put a measure in place and be like, I have to protect my responsibility so that I'm not wearing myself out. And I need you to understand, like, you're not entitled to me or my resources or my time or my energy. And I think a lot of times, Christians especially, we have this thing where it's like, turn the other cheek and walk a mile in someone's shoe and like never say no ever. And I'm like, no, it's not. God is boundaried, right? Like he has rules and this is how it works. And if you don't follow them, then there are consequences to that. We're created to be like him. We get to also have our own space. So a lot of times we can feel like we aren't actually entitled to ourselves. We don't value our own time. We don't take care of our own time for the sake of others. But it's the same thing with like the airplane, right? Like you got to put your mask on first, man. Like you literally can't help other people if you're just so worn out from trying to help other people because you just haven't taken time for yourself. So there's just necessary edges to be like, this is the capacity I can give you. If that's not enough, then I'm sorry, that's not enough.
I think one major boundary that
being able to say no.
Yeah. One major boundary talking about that I thought of that I think a lot of Christians miss is the boundary of the Sabbath. Because Jesus specifically said like the Sabbath was made for you, not people for the Sabbath. So like it is a specific designated time that we get to have where if we want to do it, we're going to do it. If we don't want to do it, we're not going to do it. And I think people miss that because they're like, oh, ministry is just giving, 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 giving. But there's a part where we need to actually receive, and the Sabbath is the perfect time, regardless if it's on a. I slurred that weirdly. The Sabbath is a perfect time to just rest and almost be selfish, really. I think.
It can feel selfish if you've been told your whole life that taking
Right,
care
but
of
it's
yourself
not really.
It's not.
Because you can't give what you don't have.
Very vital.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's part of it too, right? Like part of our indoctrination, for lack of a better phrase, is like, oh, it's selfish to prioritize yourself. Like, that's not okay. And I'm like, Jesus literally left his disciples in a real weird situation and was like, I'm going to go handle myself. You stay here.
Yeah.
Right? And then he came back and checked on them, and they were messing up like usual, and he went away again. Like, we have examples of him being like, I gotta rest. And he's God, so like, if he can do it and needs to do it, then surely we as humans definitely need to do that.
Yeah.
You know, I'm thinking
Often
about
with Drew.
that verse that says that we're supposed to love God with all of our heart, mind, body, and soul, and love others as we love ourselves.
Gotta love yourself first.
Yeah, and it's so weird because in 1 Corinthians 13, it says that love is not puffed up. But I think, and where I'm going with this is I want to talk about how we have failed our boundaries or to set boundaries either with ourselves or in relationships we've been in.
Yeah.
Because with myself, I know that I've been puffed up thinking that I am capable of doing more than I am capable.
Oof.
And oh well, Tim, you don't deserve rest because you're a piece of crap because you failed in the past. You have all this sin debt. You have all this piece of crap debt to make up. So you don't deserve to rest. Oh, by the way, even though you've done a lot, you could still do more. And why do you think you get to rest? There's so much brokenness out there, Tim. You need to be a good Christian. You need to be a good follower of God. There's so much bad in the world. It's all on your shoulders. It's not Christ in you. It's Tim in you.
Yeah.
Oh.
Even at work, man, the same thing, right? Like, I had a conversation with my boss recently, and she was like, what makes you feel successful? And I was like, checking things off a list. She was like, how often do you feel that way? Never. Like, I don't ever get enough done. There's always more I can be doing. You know, and that's that thing, like having good boundaries with yourself, right? Like, I not only have to protect my time from other people, my capacity from other people, I have to protect that from myself. Like, there's no better liar to me than me about how much I can accomplish, what I'm capable of, what my capacity is. It's like filling up a Thanksgiving plate, you know? Like, the edges of the plate are the only thing that stop you from getting more, not what you can actually eat. Like, that shouldn't be how that goes. Like, if you have a clear understanding of your capacity, then you should be able to handle, like, this is the limit. But we overestimate all the time. All the time. What our abilities are with ourselves and within relationship, and then we just burn out.
Yeah, you know, early on in my career with GameStop, I was an assistant manager at the one in the mall. That's when I met Brandon, actually.
And me.
And you, that's right, Poppy from Starbucks.
Yes.
That's right,
We all worked in the mall.
Wow.
Mall employees reunited.
Hey.
So initially when I worked there, like way back in the day, I was addicted to a game called Final Fantasy XI. And not just that, but League of Legends. So if you play League of Legends, what's up? But man, there would be nights where I knew that I was accountable to a staff and to open a store and to set a standard and to, you know, boundaries with myself to be healthy and stuff. And it'd be like 11 o'clock and I'm thinking, okay, I have to open up the store at 8. I can play for another hour. 12 o'clock rolls around. I can play for another hour. One more, it's always one more game. 4 a.m. rolls around. I'm like, well, I might as well just stay up. You know, just keep playing. And
Who
then
needs sleep?
Yeah. And so I would take a shower and just go to work. And it's like enough of that built a really bad process in me. And now I'm like, is it wise for me to stay up until 3, 4, 5? Is it healthy if I can actually get all my stuff done? Like, what's the deal? And that's cloudy because I didn't set boundaries for myself in more formative years. But like, what about you guys? Like, where have you failed when it comes to setting boundaries or respecting boundaries?
There's plenty of places I've had poor boundaries with my parents, up until the point where I moved out with them. like figuring out where my responsibilities begin and theirs end. And I couldn't find the balance. So and also like there's a lot of things they spoke into my life that were not applicable, but I couldn't tell. So at the time, I had problems with that. I had problems with boundaries with helping people. It wasn't until last year that I actually realized that I wasn't omnipresent. You would think I would have learned that sooner, but no.
I remember this.
You were 2 years old.
I was like, wow, I cannot be with all these people all the time.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a problem up until that point because I didn't have a lot of friends.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like I had like this like pre-established crap ton of friends to help me realize that sooner. I didn't. But then I realized, wow, I was giving way too much time to way too many people, and I was draining out pretty easily. So like giving my time to people was a place where I had bad boundaries.
Gotcha.
And so those are two good examples.
Well, and that's a good example as well, because we learn boundaries by modeling,
Yeah.
right? So if your parents didn't have, no, I'm not saying this about your parents, but generically,
Suck it, Kim and Mark.
Wow.
if your parents
Just
didn't display good boundaries on any level, right? So we talked about with commitment and intimacy, like there's the different levels, like emotional, spiritual, intellectual, and physical. If your parents didn't display good boundaries in any of those areas, then you don't know until you come across a moment where you're like, wow, I really love people and I want to hang out with everyone because everyone's great. And I went through the same thing. Let me just tell you, where I was just like, I love people so much, and I had no free time at all ever, and I was just like, I am an extrovert, so I'm getting energy from this, but also I feel like I'm dying slowly, and I don't know how to deal with this information right now. And so actually 2020 has been really great in one specific way. FOMO out the window. No fear of missing
Nobody
out.
was doing anything last year.
Nobody was doing anything. If they did, it was very like, shh, quiet, don't tell everyone because we don't want to get in trouble. And it was great because then you didn't have either side of it, right? You didn't have, oh man, I'm not invited to this thing that I keep seeing. And, oh man, well, if I invite this person, then I have to invite that whole group, and then I have to invite that whole group because they'll get upset if they do. Like, and just like being like, you're just going to hang out with who you hang out with? It's fine. And so that was really great, like, as far as that goes. But, like, yeah, like, examples of, like, bad boundaries that actually I saw my sister with her kids really put in place good boundaries, which, if I ever have kids, I'm totally emulating, which is teaching her children that not only did they have a no, so, like, if you were tickling my nephew, which he loved being tickled, but if he said no, you had to stop. That was the rule. So he learned that if he said no, it meant something, and he would be listened to. But at the same time, he also learned that other people have a no. So he had to listen. So you know those kids where it's like, oh yeah, do it one more time. And you're like, okay, we're doing it one more time. And they're like, no, no, no. And they throw like a whole tantrum because like they don't understand no's. Like with my nephew, if you said, okay, but we're doing it one more time, he didn't fight you on it. Because you're like, no, I'm tired. And he's like, got it.
Oh man,
Because I get to say that I'm tired too.
that really clears up so much stuff too, because there's this weird culture now where it's like if a guy and a girl are engaging in whatever, and beyond that, because there's homosexual relationships and stuff too. Just
Yeah,
if
consent
people
in general.
consent, yeah, it's like for some reason in our culture there's this sphere of bias, I guess, I don't know, this sphere within a sphere where it's like if somebody says no, they're just playing hard to get.
Yeah.
That's why Pepe Le Pew got canceled.
Oh, good. Well, that makes sense.
Yeah,
He
you know.
really did not listen.
Yeah, well, it's like I'll be tickling
Most
Ariane,
Disney movies.
and she's like, no, but she'll be laughing, and it's really confusing. It's like you're saying no, but you're laughing. I don't understand.
Which it could be confusing.
Of course, I understand.
I am ticklish as well, and I don't really want you to tickle me. I can't help the involuntary laugh that's happening. It could be confusing if you don't know the difference, though. Where it's like, no, I actually mean no, even if I'm laughing.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like that kind of thought of like instilling from a young age, like everyone gets a no, and you have to honor that. That's a boundary, right? Like you getting to say no and saying yes to things, right? We both have to agree to say yes to things for that to work. And I think it is like consent culture coming now is unfortunately a new thing for reasons like Pepe Le Pew or Sleeping Beauty, who gets kissed by someone who she's never met. Like there's a joke on Eliza Schlesinger's special where she's like, "Oh man, if you just kiss them when they're sleeping, they're forever grateful, officer." Like, which is hilarious, but like so illustrative of like the twisted thought patterns. And even like I was talking to some friends last night of like, even in biblical things, right? Like we have this thought where like women are seductresses, right? And men are helpless to the seductresses. And you're like, what? Where did that come from? Like, where did this start? This paradigm where like femme fatales and then men who overpower. Like,
So-
what?
If you go on my Facebook page, I shared something recently that Muhammad Ali said. Did you see that post?
I did not. What?
So he was talking to his daughter, and
I did see that. Go through it though.
yeah, so he was talking to his daughter about modesty, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he said something to the effect of your body is valuable, and things like precious jewels and whatnot are they're so deep in the earth and they're protected because they're valuable.
Mm-hmm.
You too should protect yourself. And it's like, on one hand, that makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
On another hand, and if like the big thing that I pulled from it is, it's like we have to be responsible to our own convictions when, and I'll bring this back around to boundaries specifically. We have to acknowledge our own boundaries in that way, but men and women alike, it's like, man, with modesty culture, with all this stuff, it's like, just because something seems delicious or like you want to partake doesn't mean that you have to.
Yeah.
You know, it's like Ariane is helping me eat better and we're working out and stuff. And just because I want a cheeseburger doesn't mean that I have to go get that cheeseburger, even though I'm a sucker for pictures, man. Like at restaurants, man, if you show me a picture, it's done.
Like, I want that. I haven't even looked at the rest of the menu, but that picture is, let's go.
This is the whole boundary thing that we're talking about, man.
Advertisers know.
You know, like there have been so many resolves I've made through the course of my life. And the moment my emotions kicked in, it's like, what boundary, man? What are you talking about? I want this right now.
Yeah.
You know? And like in our relationship, talking about confusion and boundaries and all that stuff, we started off as really good friends, you know? And our relationship was a lot different. And then I got married. Actually, then I started dating. Then I got married. Yeah. And our relationship was a lot different. It was like a huge transition. There were a couple times where like I didn't realize that I was giving more to you than I was giving to Ariane in certain aspects. And she had to, you know, put me in check with that and like question me. But then I also had to be like, dude, you're not my wife. I got to give more to her, you know? Like, not that you were trying to take that intentionally.
No. I want them all to myself, Tim.
Behind the scenes, Get Naked Monday. No, but also it's like,
I need to leave.
but we also didn't communicate the boundary, and that's the thing. It's like as you grow up and as you mature, there's so many boundaries. Because bringing this back to intimacy and commitment, as you get older, the burden of choice to commit to certain things gets more and more. What's the word? More time sensitive, like imminent. Urgent, or it gets more urgent, I think is what I'm trying to say. Because it's like at some point you have to make a decision with what vocation you want to partake of or do. At some point in a relationship, you have to decide, do I want to marry this person or do I want to cut them free? Or is this relationship healthy? Is it unhealthy? Like at some point you have to make those decisions. Sure. And that's scary. I wanted to talk about how we failed our boundaries. We talked about that, but like picking up the pieces. So you've navigated a relationship, whether it's a business relationship or a romantic relationship, and you're identifying that there's like commitment outweighs intimacy or intimacy outweighs commitment. It's because boundaries aren't being respected. How do you know when to pick up pieces and enforce and set boundaries? And how do you know when to say, okay, well, this person or I am not respecting these boundaries. I just need to move on from this.
So I think that there's probably like a threshold of toxicity involved, right? So it's like, again, that same thing like we were talking about before, like, have you communicated your boundary? Have they listened to and agreed to it? If you both agreed to a boundary and neither one of you is enforcing it, or is it one person not like overstepping a boundary? So it's kind of dependent on the situation as far as like when to say like you should really maybe rethink this as a relationship. I think that probably has a lot to do with, you know, tolerance to toxicity and what's going on in people's lives. Because there's different seasons for relationships too, as you know. Like there's seasons where you are like super intense and like wanting to get to know each other and spending a lot of time generally at the beginning of a relationship. And then there's seasons where it's like, hey, actually like that level of intensity isn't sustainable. It needs to settle into this kind of pattern. Sometimes both people don't feel that way, you know? Like I've had friendships where I'm like, I get very excited because you're a new person. I want to know everything about you. This is going to be great. And so I spend a lot of time with that person, like bringing them into the friendship, right? But then, like, they're not my only friend. I got, like, all these other people that I also want to spend time with. So then, like, the amount of time or intensity goes way down and settles into, like, more of a normal, sustainable friendship level. And I've had people be like, why are you ghosting me? And I'm like, am I your only friend? Like, what's happening right now? Like, you should also have, like, outlets for this. And dating relationships are the same, right? Like, our culture has unfortunately created several generations of men who haven't necessarily developed core groups. We have a lot of lone wolves wandering around. And so they get into these spaces where they're in a relationship with a girl who gives them affection and time and physical touch that they don't get from anyone else because the men in our culture don't do this with each other. Although our guys do. They give hugs. It's nice. Oh, so sweet. But a lot of guys don't get that. So like suddenly they're getting this bucket of love filled by one person, which is supposed to be filled by a community that they're involved in. And so it becomes very like you can't leave. You have to stay. You have to give me all of your affection. And then it becomes this like very toxic space that isn't very boundaried because instead of it being like, hey, this is open and great, like it gets very like closed and like you have to give me all of your resource because I'm starved of that. And I think that that's one of the things is like you have all these buckets and when they're not getting filled, when you become very desperate for those things. And that leads to like really bad boundaries in general. And so I think like I really want to encourage people to have communities because then you can have like a full bucket of resource, love coming in, affection coming in, and then you don't have those problematic things with like a one-on-one relationship and someone fulfilling the you complete me type. You singular human being, give me everything because you have to complete me because I'm incomplete.
I remember watching Jerry Maguire. It's a Tom Cruise flick. You don't remember that, do you? Did you ever watch Jerry Maguire? There was this part where there were these deaf people in the elevator, and he does this like, you complete me or whatever. And back then my mom was like, oh, and she was just like swooning.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, well, I guess this is what you tell a woman when you love her. It's like, Brandon, you complete me.
Oh,
Ariane, you complete me. People out there, you complete. That's a lot of pressure.
A lot of
My
pressure.
goodness. But I'm just thinking about people that go from person to person to person to person, community to community, community, and especially church to church to church to church, group to group, and they think, okay, well, because people aren't giving to me, they, you know, something's wrong with this group, and it's like, I don't know. Whenever I'm doing the coaching thing with people, my main question is like, what are your big issues? And all the people that are involved, what is everybody's individual responsibility? And everybody wants to talk about everybody else's responsibility but their own. Yeah. And it's like when you hit them with their responsibility, it's like, that's not what I'm paying you for. And it's like, bruh, you know. But it's so true, man. Because I remember there's been so many relationships in my life where I've tried to be that to people, or I'm sorry, I expected that from people, and it's just like, people can sniff desperation. Yeah. They can smell it. It's like...
That's that clinging thing that you were talking about.
Yeah, dude. Yeah. And it's like...
Where it's like, ooh, I don't know about that. Okay.
Yeah, so...
That sounds stressful.
That's why you were talking in our other recording about different layers of commitment.
Mm-hmm.
Would you go over those real quick? Because I think that's really relevant to this.
Wait, hold on one quick second.
Okay.
There was something that I thought of, and I don't know. I feel like I have a unique perspective on this one. I feel like, honestly, there is a part of us that needs to express that you complete me thing, but it cannot be found through people. I think it must be found through God, because one of the things I've seen by myself is that that part of me doesn't go away. I've just learned to direct that part of me towards an infinite source that can handle that, because God can complete
the
me.
full 100% need.
Right. Yeah. Because it's like I think like because I can't say this is the case for everyone. I'm not everyone, but I've known several people who've had this, and I feel like it doesn't just poof goes away by having all these community of people. I think there's still a part that needs to be fulfilled, but that's where God comes into the picture to help fulfill that part of me, because He is omnipresent and omnipotent, so He can be constantly there. Because, like, for instance, I'm learning to have God fill in some spaces of things that I wanted in a relationship or in my, not a relationship, that's not the great way of putting it, but specifically in, like, that sounds weird, but specifically in, like a parental relationship was came to mind. Like, in my shortcomings with my parents, there's some things that I wanted to have in my dad that my dad can never give to me, but God can. And so He's been able to fill that space, so that allows me to then increase my relationship with my dad, because I'm no longer expecting him to give that to me anymore, because God is.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's not something you just want to just poof get away from, but that it needs to be you definitely need community. You need multiple friends, because one person cannot be your source of everything.
Yeah.
100%. But I think instead of just trying to rid yourself entirely of that, I think it's good to redirect that towards God and have Him fulfill that to be your everything, because He can.
Yeah.
And especially as you get to know Him more and your trust develops with Him. So.
Well, I mean, it was coming to mind as he was talking about it. I was like the opposite. So there's that side of it, right? Of like, I need, which we all have, right? From the moment we're born, we need other beings to take care of us.
Instant needs.
That doesn't go away. But we even have the phrase savior complex when we try to be everything for someone. Like, we literally call it a savior complex. And so I think that speaks to your point of like, there has to be something higher than you that you can turn towards to fill in those gaps.
Yeah.
Because humans will fail you. That's just how we work.
Yep.
We're very good at it. It's the one thing we're very excellent at, is failing.
Well, a lot of people I talk to in relationship stuff with my clients and whatnot, it's like I had this one client a while back that was just talking about failed relationships, and they kept saying that every single relationship that they would be in or whatever, they would always be on the lookout for the red flags.
Ooh, yeah.
And
there's always red flags.
Yeah, and that's the crazy thing. It's like, okay, this person's great. This person's great. So what about their family? Yeah, I love their family. What about their how they love other? Yeah, that's great too. What about their finances? Yeah, their finances are good. Do you feel appreciated? Yeah. But there's this one thing where they let me down.
Yeah,
and that's
100%
consistent.
perfect.
Yeah, and yet we try and find people that are.
Yeah, I know.
But touching more on what you were saying, when we did that video the other day, the layers of commitment, the one at the top is actually what Brandon just mentioned. But would you go through those real quick? Like, and if you guys are having issues with any sort of relationship, whatever, you're having boundary issues, I want you to think about, as she's going through this, what tier that relationship falls into and what the commitment level looks like to receive the intimacy of that tier.
Yeah.
And see how it breaks down.
Yeah. So I do love the tiered cake concept, because it's just very, I mean, who doesn't love cake, right?
I love cake.
So the short version of what we're talking about is that the level of intimacy should never exceed the level of commitment in kind of some similar areas. So like intellectual, emotional, spiritual, physical. And that's specifically speaking to romantic relationships, but also generically like intimacy versus commitment. So
jobs too,
jobs too.
Employee relationship, same thing.
Yeah. So with the tier, there's like the initial tier that's like the widest one, the most people are involved in it. They're going to be like acquaintances. And that's going to be like, they know maybe surface level things about your life. They may know a couple things that are slightly deeper, but you're not investing your emotional or your capacity into this particular layer of people. Your friends, these are people you've chosen to keep in your life, to walk alongside of. They are going to get more access to your internal world. They'll know more of your heart things, more deeper things, sharing life stories, mutual events, funny stories. Inside jokes happen with this level. There's actually a really good correlation between how close you are with someone and how many inside jokes you have, which is a whole different thing. But
Interesting.
because you have to be around each other to get the inside jokes. So, so friends, then you have like best friends. By the way, best friends should be a tier, not a person. It's a category of friend, which I think a lot of us miss out.
I can agree with that, actually. I've
yeah.
recently come to a place where I can see that.
Yeah. And that's relating to that thing of like one person isn't your source for everything, right? Like, so you have a category of best friends, which is people who know more things about your intimacy, more things about your history, can speak into tougher places in your life, call you on more things, hold you more accountable. And then there's like the step up from that is dating, right? Like this is one person you're choosing to invest in. And the thing with that is, and this is what you and I talked about in our video, is that the difference on intimacy between best friend category and dating about the same. Because the level of commitment for dating is at any moment it could end. So therefore, you don't want to over-invest because the commitment isn't actually there. It can feel like it because you're all like hormony and excited, but the commitment isn't actually there yet. So there's like dating. Then there's like seriously dating, like we're really only gonna be dating each other. We're moving towards marriage or engagement or moving in together, depending on what your philosophy is on life. That would come with more access to your internal world. Obviously, engaged would give you more access, but again, those things can end fairly easily. So keep that in mind as you're developing boundaries, because you can come off of those and still be healthy and not be devastated if you haven't invested too much relative to the commitment level. So engaged, a little more access than dating. Then we have marriage, which increases the intimacy greatly, right? Because this is a lifelong commitment.
You get to have sex.
True. Sex is one of the big boundary bonuses of marriage. Hopefully.
I mean, we can talk about that for at
Like,
least part of it.
Sexless marriage would be a super sad deal, but
Would be.
so we're not hoping that for anyone.
Yeah.
But yeah, so sex, so increasing physical intimacy, increasing internal intimacy. They get to see you in all the ugly spaces. They get to wake up next to your bad breath.
They get to see your bank account.
They get to see your bank account. That's real financial intimacy right there.
Brandon, how much debt do you have? No. We're not that close.
You're not married. Although in business partners, right, they would be similar to a marriage, right?
It's really weird because I do the budgeting for our family, and then I also do budgeting for me and Brandon. It's like,
because it's a business marriage. It's a pretty accurate representation, you know, that's why they're called partners. Because it's one committed person that you're walking through stuff with, so you do share more with that person than you would an employee.
Yeah.
you know, I had this funny thought the other day when I was working on stuff for us. You remember the episode of SpongeBob where SpongeBob and Patrick are taking care of the little clam?
Yes.
And then Patrick gets up and goes to work and just like sleeps under his rock, and SpongeBob is like being the mom, and he's like, look at all these diapers, look at these. Look. That's our relationship right now.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's the second to top tier, which everyone thinks of as the top tier, but there's actually still a space where your spouse does not get to have access, and that is where you and God are. So to keep a marriage from being codependent, where you are each two individual whole people having a whole relationship with God, that coming together as whole people to make a whole marriage. And that's vitally important, like you were talking about. Like,
Yeah.
even within marriage, one person cannot be your source. I also really believe that even in marriage, you should have friends that aren't both of your friends.
Mm.
Like,
Yeah.
you should have friends, and Ariane should have friends, and you should be cool with you guys hanging out with those friends.
Yes.
Because that means that there's trust involved, and there's sharing involved, and there's understanding that you are your whole person, and I am a whole person, and we choose to invest this life together.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So before we close out, because we've got a little bit longer, I want to talk about growing into an intimacy perspective, because now that we have the tiers defined, when you are a kid in school, I mean, in Corinthians, it talks like that, or it talks about when I was a kid, I saw like a kid, I thought like a kid,
Yeah.
and as you grow up, you put away your childish things. Basically, it's talking about your perspective changing.
Yeah.
Because back then, I viewed every relationship as very similar. Like, what can you give me?
Yeah.
Are you hurting me? I'm not happy with that. Mom, dad, who loves me more? Who's gonna buy me stuff? That whole thing. But as you start acknowledging these tiers, and it's something that you see subliminally, because there are some people that are like, nope, you don't access this, and you either get butthurt about it or you respect it. And then if you ever get into leadership or management, you start to understand those tiers a lot better.
Yeah.
But Tara Logue said something really, really wise a couple years ago. She said that oftentimes we think that we have more impact in a person's life than we actually do. I was thinking about that, and I was like, and specifically with regards to friendships, that really hurt, because I thought that I had more impact in certain friendships than I did. And that was me being selfish, because I never took the time to say, hey, what do you need from me in this friendship?
Yeah.
Or even asking the seemingly dangerous question, hey, where do you see our relationship? What level do you see this at? Which is the DTR, define the relationship.
Oh, jeez. We just went back to the mid-2000s for that one.
So I want to talk for a second about growing into an intimacy perspective by learning to define the relationship. How do boundaries play in this?
Well, I mean, just in terms of DTRing, and really what that comes down to is bravery and vulnerability, right? So, like, to ask that question, like, where do you see we are, requires vulnerability and bravery on both persons' part to communicate their internal world clearly. And by communicating their internal world, they're communicating their boundary. So, like, one of my friends, when he was dating his now wife, like, they would literally do regular check-ins, like, how are we feeling? How do you feel about the relationship? Should we progress? Are we good here? And it was just very, like, straightforward, and actually therefore less traumatic of a dating experience for them, because they were able to stay on the same page. And I think, like, it doesn't have to be traumatic, and it doesn't have to be extremely brave and vulnerable, but if you've never done it before, it's gonna feel like you're just trying to climb a mountain to ask that question, to be like, hey, cards on the table, this is where I'm at, where are you at? But the more you grow in intimacy, grow in cultivating that safety space between you guys of communication, then it's easier to have those kinds of conversations that are like, hey, like, I think things are going great, or I would love to do more, or can I have more of your time, or oh, I need some space. Like, all of those kinds of conversations are boundary conversations, and boundaries should be flexible. That's part of it, is that it's not a wall. But which tier you're on and what that tier means is flexible based off of how you're communicating. So it's not, I know, like, a lot of Christians growing up, like, true love waits and I Kiss Dating Goodbye and all those terrible books from the early 90s.
We should have a Where Are They Now session.
I'm pretty sure the I Kiss Dating Goodbye actually has apologized for that book and the trauma that he inflicted on a generation. But, like, even down to, like, for some people, like, kissing is not okay, even while dating, and other people, like, can't imagine dating without kissing. Like, if those two people are dating each other, they're going to keep missing each other unless they actually have a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And it might develop into a completely healthy, beautiful, lifelong relationship if they're willing to have those kinds of conversations. And I think, I mean, with, rare exceptions of like truly irresponsible with themselves humans who choose not to take ownership of their stuff. With that exception, two people who are relatively healthy, as long as they're communicating, can have a healthy relationship.
On that, I want to talk about that top layer that we touched on a second ago about your relationship with God. I watched a video recently of two guys, Bruxy Cavey and Andy Stanley, talking about why the Bible shouldn't be the center of your faith. And that's a very controversial concept, and he said something that kind of sparked interest with me. And I'm still thinking through this. But he said that a lot of times you'll see pastors say, you got to get back in the Word, and then slap the Bible as though the Bible was the Word. But the Bible's not the Word, it is the written down recordings of, people from the Old Testament and the Gospels and what people did after Jesus and stuff. The Word was Jesus. Jesus was the Word. Yeah. And he said something, he's like, when you recite what's in the Bible or you quote the Bible, instead of saying the Bible says, you should instead say Paul said, or Jesus said, or God said, to be more specific. Because with that, and once again, I'm just thinking through this, a lot of the Old Testament was people engaging in a relationship with God, and they didn't even have a Bible back then. In the New Testament, they didn't have a Bible either. Yeah. They were making the Bible. And so navigating that relationship, they couldn't go to words and say, okay, well, what does God say about this? They actually had to engage and say, okay, well, God, if you love me, because John 3:16, or in John, I gotta retrain myself to say that too. In John 3:16, it says that for God so loved the world that he gave his son, right? And so if that's the case, everything starts with love. Okay, God, if this is happening, and if you're putting up these boundaries for me, and it could be anything, guys, it could be smoking being bad for you, how you view homosexuality, how you view finances, how you view anger, any of that stuff, right? If you feel conviction from God and he's like, this is not healthy, you should begin with, okay, well, here's where I'm at. My heart's hardened towards this. I need you to help me see why it's not healthy or what's loving, right? And God, if you love me, then why is this? Let's get on the same page with this. Yeah. Because that risk, that area of risk there where you're not quite sure what each other is trying to say, that's where you form relationship. Brandon and I talk about this all the time. It's all about confrontation and conflict. And we have a lot of confrontation and conflict. But, guys, it's so necessary because you never know where you're at unless you talk about your boundaries, and you never know where the other person's at unless you ask them. It's like, God, where's your boundary with this? Yeah. Why is your boundary? Why is it such? Yeah. And okay, well, if that's the case, then how do you love me through this? Because in my relationship with my wife, it's a lifelong commitment that we've made to each other. And there's been many times where we've done and said things where it's like, that was not loving. And we had to go back to the drawing board. It's like, okay, well, what's broken in you that caused you to do this? But with God, it's not like that. It's, God, I know you're not broken. I know you love me. So help me see why you have this boundary with me.
Yeah. I think it's good too, because I saw a thing the other day that said, if someone communicates a boundary with you, it's because they're trying to keep the relationship, not get rid of it. It can feel like rejection, or it can feel like an attack, especially if you're not used to boundaries and them being enforced. But if someone is communicating a boundary to you, it's because they value you and they want their relationship to stay intact. So first is choosing to not be offended when someone communicates a boundary and to listen, because they're also in the same way saying, here's how you can love me well, right? And our relationships, again, as we mature, should be less about what can you give me and more what can I give you. So mature relationship is, how can I give, how can I love, how can I towards you, also knowing that you are doing the same to me. So mutually we are building each other up, and that's how you build intimacy. That's how you build trust. That's how you build connection. Is I'm seeing your boundary, I'm honoring that, I'm loving you through that. You're doing the same for me, and therefore we're building trust, we're building safety, we're building room for us to both grow.
Mm-hmm.
And so like communicating a boundary can feel really scary because it's like you don't know how the other person's going to respond. But if you build a culture in your relationships that says boundaries are good, boundaries are healthy, they're important, they're vital, then when you have a communication point where you're like, hey, I actually didn't realize that I have a boundary here, but I actually need this boundary to exist. Then it's not like, oh, dare you, I'm so upset, like, and I don't agree with that boundary. And then it's like, oh, I'm so sorry, like I didn't know that that's how you felt, and now that I know that's how you feel, I really want to love you in that way. Like I've had friends that are like in my friend group we have a chat, and there are times where we'll be like, hey, I need to vent about this, and it's like we all know like they're not looking for advice, they're not looking for our input or a solution. They just need us to hear them. So our response that we've learned is, hey, I'm with you, I'm hearing you, I'm listening, right? And then there's times where they're like, hey, I need feedback. Like, okay, cool, like we know you've communicated your need, your boundary, and we can then meet you in that space and love you well. And so I think that it just comes down to being able to communicate needs, communicate boundaries, and recognizing that when someone is doing that with you, it's because they value the relationship and really want to love you.
I think it's also really interesting when people are willing to tell you no.
Oh yeah.
Because that, honestly, that means that they respect you.
Yes.
Oddly enough, because it's like,
because otherwise they just ghost.
yeah, they totally would. Because I know I've definitely done that in the past where I've set a boundary or they've set a boundary, and it's like, I'm not going to engage because I don't trust the other person to respond well. Mm-hmm. That's a different topic. Like Brandon, what are you thinking?
I think that I agree greatly with the statement that boundaries are to keep people in your life rather than to keep them out of your life.
Yeah.
That's something I've had to tell my parents in particular. It's like, I'm not setting up these boundaries with you because I don't want anything to do with you. Rather, there are specific things that you are doing that is making me anxious or angry or something. And the way of which you're bringing this to me is just not going well. And so I'm putting up this boundary so that way I can spend more time. Because you want to spend more time with me. Yeah. And I want to spend more time with you. So I need you to stop doing this so I can fulfill the mandate of spending more time together. Yes. So, I'm not trying to keep you out of my life. Rather, it's quite the opposite. Yeah. So I've had to, I completely, yes, that's the whole thing. I've had to lay down some really thick boundaries with a particular person recently because there was so much complaining going on, and I cannot continue in the capacity I am in their life with all the complaints that are going on. So I had to say, okay, here's the boundary. Stop complaining. I don't want you complaining about all these things you've complained about. If you complain, I'm going to distance myself from you. Yeah. I'm okay with you talking. Now, here's the leniency. I'm okay with you talking about this going on in your life and where you're having a bad day and try to help you through all that. But if it just starts to project onto other people and other things, I can't help you there. Yeah. And I'm not going to continue to subject myself because it literally brought me to a place of PTSD of just reminding myself of a time I was involved with a manipulative family where I was never right with them and they complained about everything I ever did. And I can't go there anymore. Yeah. So, it's interesting that we've talked about, like, what's the point that you kind of have to, set the boundary up, like, and it's like to the degree that you can handle what they're doing. Like, it took me an entire year before I realized, okay, now this has gone too far with the particular person that I set the boundary with. But up to a year, I had grace for them because I knew what they were going through. I, was compassionate, and it wasn't doing anything to me. Like, I was able to portion my time out in a good way, everything. And it just got to a place where it was just too toxic. And at that point, it was like, okay, here's the boundary. I have to hardline this one. Yes. And I said, I made it very clear. It's like, look, if you don't complain, nothing has to change. Yeah. If you do complain, I'm going to have to immediately take a step. I don't want to have to do that.
Yeah.
I really don't. I love you. I want you in my life, but I can't go any further than this.
Yeah.
And on that real quick, Brandon, because we've had issues in our relationship because of that. Guys, you know, the cool thing about that top layer with God is that the missing element in a lot of relationships is grace, because grace does not make sense.
Yeah.
And Brandon, with his eggshell PTSD manipulation thing that he deals with and is still like working through, he's put boundaries up that do not make sense to me. It's like, dude, just get over it. You've got Jesus. Move past it. I'm not like that piece of crap. Quit saying that I'm manipulative. But
Wow.
the thing is, it's like when some people put up boundaries and they don't make sense to you, you have to decide, is it worth the cost? Like your job that you're at that you just absolutely hate, it's worth the cost for some reason. You know, you go to work because you like the money, because you have bills to pay. It's like, okay, it's worth the cost. But at what point in the relationship that you're in right now are you going to say this person is worth grace? What they deal with, it's not bigger than the amount of grace I'm willing to give to them, even when it doesn't make sense. Because in my relationship with my wife, there are so many things where it's like, we've been over this, we've prayed about this, you know what's due, just put your emotions in check, me included, and just get over it. But no, it's like, I've committed my life to this person, much like Jesus committed his life to me. So grace covers everything. And so for her, my wife, when she, in my relationship with Brandon, with Chelsea, in those moments where the boundary doesn't make sense, I have to ask myself, is this relationship worth it? And if the answer is yes, sometimes I have to respect the boundary, even if it doesn't make sense. And, you know, 1 Corinthians 13 says, faith, hope, and love. Faith is the belief in things unseen, and hope is the certainty that things will get better. You have to have faith and hope for people. Because if you don't understand the boundary, if you have faith and hope in that relationship, you believe that it's going to get better. You believe they're going to move past it. And you believe that this boundary that doesn't make sense is one day not going to be a thing. And people need that. People really need that. So if you're looking at a relationship that you have and you want the level of intimacy, you have to be committed to the point where, well, this doesn't really make sense, but they're worth the commitment, even though grace is tough sometimes.
Well, I think I want to caveat that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care if it makes sense to you. That's the boundary they've communicated. So the cost is, am I willing to love them well where they're at? But it's not, am I willing to go with the boundary?
Yeah.
So I just want to caveat that, because we just literally went over consent culture.
Yep.
And consent culture is, this is the boundary that has been communicated. Cool.
And like Brandon did, you can set a boundary for somebody else's boundary.
Yeah.
It's like,
and it doesn't have to, because you were communicating your capacity. If you had said, you're not allowed to do that, I am now in your space, and you are not allowed to do that in your space. Like, no, you can go do that in your space. Have a blast complaining over there in your space. But in my space, this is the environment I'm cultivating.
Yeah.
And so because I need to cultivate this in my own space, I can't allow that to come into my space, because it will mess with what I'm doing. And so I think that's really great. And I think one of the tactics I use with people like that, before the hard line happens, because that does happen sometimes, is redirecting. So a lot of people do come to me, a lot of people need to vent, and a lot of people need to process. And I will always, part of the way that I usher them back out, right, of my space when we're done, is that I give them homework, essentially. So I'm like, cool, you've expressed all this stuff, and that's fine. You needed to process, you needed to vent, that's fine. However, we're not going to leave it here. We're not going to leave you in this space where you're just a mess, or you're just complaining, or you're just negative, or whatever, or you're tearing apart this relationship or everyone around you. We're going to take a next step, because I believe in you. I think that you're better than this. And I'm going to say, hey, when you're complaining about your marriage, like, cool, that's his part. What's your part? Because no matter what, like, I am always cognizant, I am only hearing one side of whatever is happening. there is other sides to what is happening. And so even with like the most extreme situation, I don't really want to hear about like whatever everyone else is doing, because there's nothing we can do to control that. Because again, we're talking about your yard, not that person's yard or my yard. What you are in charge of your yard. What is your yard? Cool. Let's focus on that.
Yeah.
And then that becomes less of a consistent thing. And then if it gets very clear, if it is a consistent thing, and you can be like, okay, here's the edge
Yeah.
of my capacity for that.
Yeah. The part of my hardlining was also because what the person was doing was also affecting a community that I was shepherding.
Yes.
So I had a little more
Hard.
authority in that situation.
Yeah.
I wouldn't normally speak quite like that, except that it's not just me.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but yeah. So
And when you're shepherding, it is harder. Like you were talking about, when you get in management, when you get in those places, those levels become very clear. And then you do have more responsibility.
Yeah.
But when you get clarity on that, it's so much easier.
Yeah.
Because you start to understand that consequence is a good thing.
Mm.
It's like, it's not, I'm imposing these consequences because you suck. I'm imposing these consequences because you've earned them. Let's walk through it together.
yeah.
That's a totally, I mean, that's
Yeah.
what God did. I mean,
And not
that's why
leaving
Jesus
someone
came,
alone in
guys.
it. Yeah, not leaving someone alone in it either.
Yeah.
It's not just like, here's some shit for you to handle. Go have fun. It's like, hey, like I'm willing to walk with you through this, but like here's the rules.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. He's good boundaries with us.
Yes.
good ground rules
Yeah.
for how things go.
Yeah.
Roommates, jobs, relationships, doesn't matter what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Ground rules are a must.
Yeah.
Well, Brandon, how do you want to close this out?
Well, I want to thank you guys for watching today.
Bye, guys.
Bye. I'm gonna put a boundary right now. Bye.
This is the hard line.
But anyways, if you guys really enjoyed this whole live stream that we've done, be sure to like it and to share with your friends, because we want to help other people who are trying to, again, figure out that balance between having intimacy and being committed to a person. So if you know anyone who's going through something, or you just want to share with your friends and family, please do. And make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube, because we are doing content like this all the time, and we'd love to have you be a part of the discussion as well. Which, if you have any other questions you'd like for us to talk about from this video, please make sure to tell us about it. You can message us on Facebook, or send us an email, thoughtraid@gmail.com. But with that said, I want to thank you guys for watching. We broadcast every week on Monday, Friday, and Saturday. Monday, 4 p.m., and Friday at 2:30 p.m., and Saturdays is a little bit of a flex. So thank you guys.
Yeah, I can see far away from where I've been. He says I see a potential. I see a potential in my eyes. I see a potential. I never lost sight of the reason why you're alive. You're alive. You're alive. We sing Jesus, you're alive.